Adolf Hitler, born on April 20th, 1889, in Braunau-am-Inn, Austria-Hungary, was a dictator who led Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945. He is infamous for instigating World War II and for his central role in the Holocaust, which led to the deaths of 6 million Jews and millions of others deemed undesirable by his regime. Hitler was the fourth of 6 children born to Alois Hitler and Clara Posel. His early life was marked by a difficult relationship with his father, who was authoritarian and harsh, while his mother was a nurturing figure. Hitler showed little academic promise and struggled in school. After his father's death in 1903, Hitler moved to Vienna, where he pursued his dream of becoming an artist, but was rejected twice by the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna. During this time, he developed strong nationalist and anti-Semitic views, influenced by the rise of racial theories in the city. In 1913, Hitler moved to Munich, Germany, where he lived in poverty. With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, Hitler enlisted in the Bavarian Reserve Regiment, serving as a soldier. He was wounded twice during the war, first in 1916 during the Battle of the Somme, and later in 1918, when he temporarily lost his sight from a mustard gas attack. The defeat of Germany in the war had a profound impact on Hitler, and he blamed the country's loss on Jews, communists, and the Treaty of Versailles, which he felt humiliated Germany and imposed crippling reparations. After the war, Hitler joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, in 1919. He quickly rose through the ranks due to his charismatic speaking abilities and radical ideas. In 1923, Hitler attempted a coup, known as the Beer Hall Putsch, to overthrow the Weimar government. The coup failed, and Hitler was arrested and sentenced to prison, where he wrote his autobiographical manifesto, Mein Kampf. In the book, he outlined his political ideology, including his views on racial purity, the superiority of the Aryan race, and his hatred of Jews and communists. After his release in 1924, Hitler focused on rebuilding the NSDAP and gaining support. The Great Depression, which began in 1929, contributed to widespread discontent in Germany, and many turned to extremist political ideologies. Hitler's message of restoring Germany's former glory resonated with the public, and by the early 1930s, the Nazi Party became the second-largest party in the Reichstag, German parliament. In 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. After the Reichstag fire in February 1933, he used the event to push through the Reichstag Fire Decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed the arrest of political opponents. Shortly thereafter, the Enabling Act was passed, granting Hitler dictatorial powers and marking the beginning of his totalitarian rule. Hitler quickly moved to consolidate power, suppressing political opponents, silencing the press, and establishing a police state through the Gestapo. The Nazis also began implementing policies to rid Germany of Jews, Roma, disabled individuals, and others they considered undesirable. This marked the beginning of the Holocaust, a systematic, state-sponsored persecution that would result in the murder of 6 million Jews. In 1938, Hitler annexed Austria and demanded Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia, be ceded to Germany. In response to these aggressive actions, Britain and France pursued a policy of appeasement, hoping to avoid conflict. However, on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, prompting Britain and France to declare war, thus starting World War II. During the war, Hitler sought to expand Germany's territory, culminating in the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. However, the war soon began to turn against Germany. Despite initial successes, the Germans were unable to maintain their hold on the Soviet Union, and the Allies, including the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union, launched a series of devastating offensives on both the eastern and western fronts. By 1944, the Allied forces were closing in on Germany from all directions. Hitler's health and mental state deteriorated, and he became increasingly isolated in his Führer bunker in Berlin. As Soviet forces approached Berlin in April 1945, Hitler realized that defeat was imminent. On April 30th, 1945, he committed suicide by swallowing cyanide and shooting himself. His death marked the end of the Nazi regime. Hitler's legacy is one of destruction and hatred. The war he started resulted in the deaths of an estimated 70 to 85 million people, including civilians, soldiers, and victims of the Holocaust. His regime left a lasting scar on the world, with the effects of World War II still reverberating today. Hitler's life and actions serve as a grim reminder of the dangers of totalitarianism, racism, and the consequences of unchecked power. After Hitler's death, Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allied forces on May 8, 1945, marking the end of the war in Europe. The aftermath of his actions left Germany divided into East and West, with the former under Soviet control and the latter under American, British, and French influence. The atrocities committed under Hitler's regime led to the establishment of numerous post-war tribunals, the most prominent being the Nuremberg trials, where leading Nazi officials were tried for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other offenses. In the decades following the war, the impact of Hitler's ideology and the devastation caused by his regime continued to be studied and debated. The Holocaust, in particular, became a subject of intense historical research and education to ensure that such horrors would never be repeated. The international community developed institutions like the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to prevent the rise of another totalitarian regime like Nazi Germany. In the years after World War II, the horrors of Hitler's regime became central to discussions about human rights, justice, and the nature of evil. His rise to power, the war he initiated, and the systematic genocide he oversaw are constant reminders of the consequences of unchecked hatred and the dangers of extremist ideologies. Germany, particularly, underwent a significant transformation in the post-war period. The country sought to reconcile with the world, working through reparations, acknowledgement of its past, and reforms aimed at preventing future authoritarian regimes. The memory of Adolf Hitler's reign remains deeply embedded in German society, shaping the country's commitment to democracy and human rights. Hitler's ideology, centered around Aryan supremacy and anti-Semitism, left a dangerous legacy that continues to influence far-right movements and extremist groups around the world. His name remains synonymous with cruelty, violence, and the darkest chapters of human history. Scholars and educators emphasize the importance of remembering and learning from this history in the hopes of preventing the rise of similar ideologies in the future. In the decades following World War II, the legacy of Adolf Hitler and the atrocities of the Nazi regime remained deeply ingrained in global consciousness. As the world recovered from the devastation wrought by the war, the significance of confronting the ideology that enabled Hitler's rise to power became more critical. The Nuremberg trials, held between 1945 and 1949, were a pivotal moment in international law, as they brought many high-ranking Nazi officials to justice. The trials set precedents for prosecuting war crimes and crimes against humanity, and they contributed to the eventual establishment of the International Criminal Court (ICC) in 2002, aimed at ensuring that such crimes would not go unpunished. Germany, after the war, was left to reckon with its role in the atrocities committed under Hitler. The nation underwent a process of denazification, during which former Nazis were removed from positions of power and influence. However, the scars of Hitler's regime lingered in both the national psyche and the physical landscape of Europe. The country was divided, with the Soviet-controlled East Germany and the Western-controlled Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, becoming distinct entities, both confronting the war's legacy in different ways. The Berlin Wall, erected in 1961, symbolized the ideological divide between the East and West, as tensions from the war remained unresolved during the Cold War. West Germany's post-war generation, particularly in the 1950s and 1960s, focused heavily on reconciliation with the Jewish people and other victimized groups. The German government atoned for its past through reparations to Holocaust survivors and by formally acknowledging its responsibility for the genocide. Public remembrance, such as the creation of memorials and museums dedicated to the victims of the Holocaust, became an integral part of German culture, especially as the country grew more democratic and integrated into the European community. The 1980s saw a significant increase in efforts to preserve Holocaust memory, with major historical events such as the 40th anniversary of the war's end serving as moments for reflection. The memory of Hitler also became a central component of international discourse surrounding human rights and the dangers of totalitarianism. As the world entered the late 20th century, there were increasing efforts to prevent the rise of any future leaders with similarly destructive ideologies. The development of international norms and frameworks aimed at curbing atrocities, such as the Responsibility to Protect Doctrine and the Genocide Convention, were directly influenced by the catastrophic events of the Holocaust and World War II. Efforts to monitor and prevent genocide, such as in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia, reflected lessons learned from Hitler's genocidal policies. In Germany, the memory of Hitler's reign is not only preserved in historical and academic contexts, but also woven into the fabric of the country's identity. The German government has committed to maintaining the legacy of remembrance and education, with mandatory Holocaust education for students, public monuments such as a memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, and a continuous effort to counter neo-Nazi ideologies. Germany's engagement with its past became a model for how other nations might reckon with their own histories of violence and oppression. At the same time, Hitler's name remains synonymous with evil in popular culture and historical study. His image is often used as a symbol of pure malevolence, representing the worst aspects of humanity. However, in the years since the war, the way in which Hitler is viewed has also spurred debates. Some have argued that the portrayal of Hitler as an almost singular embodiment of evil risks oversimplifying the complex socio-political factors that allowed Nazi ideology to flourish. Others contend that his unique ability to manipulate fear, racism, and nationalistic fervor has made him a figure whose lessons must never be forgotten. Despite his death, the ideological impact of Hitler's regime persists in various ways. Neo-Nazi groups, white supremacist movements, and other extremist organizations continue to evoke Hitler's image and rhetoric, often promoting hate, violence, and discrimination. The Internet, with its global reach, has allowed these ideologies to spread in ways that were previously unimaginable. As a result, combating hate speech and extremism has become an ongoing challenge for governments, social platforms, and activists, with the lessons of Hitler's time remaining as urgent as ever. The enduring impact of Adolf Hitler's life and actions is a stark reminder of the potential consequences of unchecked power, hate, and ideological extremism. The destruction wrought by his leadership during the 1930s and 1940s serves as an eternal lesson in the fragility of human rights, the importance of safeguarding democracy, and the necessity of confronting prejudice and intolerance in all its forms. The world continues to honor the memory of those who suffered during his reign, ensuring that their stories are never forgotten while striving to prevent history from repeating itself.